Hey there, Jim Johnson for Accent Help, and I'm sort of in part 3 of diacritics and suprasegmentals. Now what I want to do is talk about some of the symbols that I will commonly use with vowels to help to tweak different elements of accents. So my favorite one that I use a lot with accents, but I even use it when I'm really sort of talking about a more neutral one. So in talking about diacritics, those little things that tweak elements of a sound, and one that I use all the time is what's called midcentralization. So midcentralization, primarily, I find it useful in talking about vowels. Mid-central is in the middle of this chart, which is the schwa. So mid-centralization is almost schwaification because you are schwaifying a sound. So on the outside of the chart are a lot of the sounds that we commonly use in English. When they start to creep in, which almost all of us do, because most of us don't operate with a vowel quadrilateral that's this open, with a mouth space that's that open. Instead, we're closing that space down all the time. If you're not clear on this chart, front of the mouth, back of the mouth, top of the mouth, bottom of the mouth. And this E, for example, all the way up high and forward, if you mid-centralize it, which most of us do, we kind of close down the space, we don't do it as much. You won't say fleece, you'll say fleece, fleece, fleece. So already there I'm kind of mid-centralizing it. So if I wanted to indicate that, I might write that lowercase I for the E sound, and I'd put just a little X above it. Mid-centralization. So it's schwaifying that sound. This happens in a ton of accents. Like a lot of them are fairly subtle, where you may take, say, the O diphthong and mid-centralize the first part so that it's O. Instead it shifts to O, O. But it's not quite maybe to the schwa, O, commonly used for RP, receive pronunciation. Oh, don't know, don't go. Oh, oh, oh. So you might think like there's a lot of accents that sort of go oh, oh, that do a subtle version of that, like some southern accents that are not super close, say, to Pittsburgh or Baltimore or something like that, where they'll go a little stronger, more towards almost an oh, oh, no, don't go. It almost sounds a little Southern California. So that's mid-centralization conceptually, okay? So it's schwaification of a vowel. So that's one that I use a lot just in transcribing because that's a great reducing diacritic. It takes a sound and it makes it sort of less clear. So in an unstressed syllable, if I'm stressing the word fleece, it should, ideally, to communicate, be clearer. But if it's unimportant now because I've already talked about fleece, and now that I've talked about fleece, I've mid-centralized that vowel. All right, a couple other variations on tweaks that I really like to do with vowels. It's additional lip rounding or reduced lip rounding. So for example, for Americans, the aw sound as in thought, or for most Americans as in cloth, the way that most Americans actually say that, which is this open O is what it's called, it looks like a backwards C, is that most Americans do this little diacritic. So notice I'm just putting a little C underneath it. Whereas most, say, RP speakers and many people from England will do additional lip rounding. So this would be the aw sound, as Americans tend to say it, is more aw, thought, cloth. Not all Americans, but in general, I'd say most. And then with many speakers from England, it's more thought, cloth. Sorry, thought, cloth goes to another sound altogether. But they do a bigger rounding, just as New Yorkers do. So being from the Midwest, I will tend to say thought, cloth, and a New Yorker will tend to say thought, cloth. So they'll tend to do the additional rounding. So those are a couple of diacritics. You could almost think of it as one, and which way are you going? And those are a couple that I find really useful for accents. Again, as a reminder, the setup of the chart is this is the front of the mouth, this is the back. So this one going this way is the lips rounding, and this one going the other way is your lips pulling back over your head and falling off on down your back. Not really. But if that helps you to remember how those go, that's awesome. The next ones that I want to show you, it kind of annoys me how the IPA, the International Phonetic Association, they think they know more than me. They do. But it kind of annoys me the choices that they made, because what they did is this one's about moving vowels around again. We could look at a couple other things. By the way, there are a couple of diacritics for a sound being centralized instead of mid-centralized, but I find that I use mid-centralized a lot more, so that's why I focused on that one. But some other ones that I find really useful for moving vowels around can be a tweak on centralizing, which is moving vowels up or down. That's what I want to talk about first of all. So for example, the way that most Americans say the ah sound as opposed to the way that many other people will say the ah sound. So for example, again, between, in general, Americans and people from England, in general, is that Americans tend to raise this sound. So the diacritic for that looks like a thumbtack that's pushing up. So the point of the thumbtack tells you where it goes. So you're raising this so that it starts to approach eh. And we do this a lot when we just say a word like cat, trap, trap. That may be more approaching the eh sound. Put it before a nasal consonant like can't stand, and we lift it even more, maybe where it's approaching this sound lowered. Because that's in fact what a lot of people in England do, is they actually make this much more distinct and they start to take it down towards that so that it becomes trap. So that instead of trap, American raising it, it's more trap. So it's not quite approaching like more in the north where you'll get trap, bath, where trap and bath both go towards this one here, but it's headed in that direction. So you can raise a sound and lower a sound. And I find this, I don't use this with consonants, I use it with vowels. But I find it incredibly helpful in even conceiving of accents. So these diacritics I find really, really essential. Now what annoys me is they do have additional diacritics that are like this, and that basically head back, and this one that heads forward. But they gave these different terms. So this is raised and lowered, and they called this one advanced tongue root and retracted tongue root. And I'll talk about this one again when we get to consonants, ways that you could tweak consonants. But it annoys me they called those because then they gave different symbols for advanced and retracted. Instead, they made it advanced and retracted. So you would put those underneath. So for example, Americans in general take our sound and we go up. We kind of bring it forward. Up, supper, love, strut, strut. So it's really approaching a schwa. So Americans advance that one in general. So that's what I would use in that instance. Now, if you've got someone, so that also happens a ton for a lot of speakers with the oo sound, and in goose, that becomes goose, goose, goose. That's approaching the barred U here. For the retraction, I don't tend to use that quite as much, but that's a way that you could explain the way that a lot of us say the father sound. Now, J.C. Wells uses palm for the word for this word, but most Americans say palm, something more rounded. So I'm going to use father. So father, a lot of Americans don't go all the way to opening up the back. Father, we go fa, probably not all the way to the Bostonish Pakikar and Harvard Yard. Father, that's my father. But instead, that's my father, father. Probably something between father, father. So one of the ways you could explain that is that we do that retracted. You could also write it as that advanced. Arguably, they're very close to the same thing. So Some diacritics that I use a lot in even conceiving accents are whether it's more rounded or less rounded, and whether it's raised or lowered, or moving forward, further forward, or moving further back. And then I also mentioned one that I'll use all the time is mid-centralization, that little X. There you go. Those are the primary ones that I use that I feel like really relate to trying to describe accents with phonetics, specifically diacritics. More diacritics coming up, but there you go. If you're still awake, you can check out my materials on accenthelp.com. Thanks.